Yo, what is up, guys? Welcome to today's presentation. Today's going to be a big, humongous, fast presentation. I'm basically going to combine everything into one. So instead of having like a couple other modules after this is going to be the second and the last module out of this entire workout series. So last time we spoke, we touched on how to actually create your workout program based on your day-to-day schedule, whether you want to go to the gym 2 times a week to 6 times a week. It all depends on your experience level. So are you a beginner, intermediate, or advanced? And also based on your schedule. Like, are you super busy throughout the day, or do you have a bit more free time to allocate towards going to the gym, right? So there's no right or wrong answer there. And so now that we've kind of figured that part out and we figured out our workout split, now let's touch on how to actually like create and start developing your entire workout program. So before we begin, guys, I do want to start with a couple of definitions. Some of the terms I'll be using in today's presentation are a bit more advanced, are a bit more scientific, so I do apologize for that. However, hopefully with these definitions, it'll kind of like help you guys out a bit. So the first definition I want to cover with you guys today is the accumulation phase. Now, basically what this means is that, as the name implies, it accumulates week after week. So this basically just means making each week harder and harder and harder. So as you work out, you obviously want to accumulate to it progressively getting harder and harder, because if you're constantly doing the same workouts, same exercises for the same amount of reps, sets, and weight, you're not progressing and your body has no reason to like adapt and grow to that newer stimulus, right? So you want to make sure that your workouts program has an accumulation phase where you progressively get better, right? The second definition here is deload week or a deload phase. This basically is an entire week where you drop the fatigue that you've accumulated over the past couple of weeks of hard training. So that's going to be the deload week. The third one here is a mesocycle. Basically, what the mesocycle is, it's basically the accumulation phase of, let's say, 4 to 8 weeks of hard training plus the deload week. So those strung together is basically what you call a mesocycle. Now, a training block, or a lot of people also refer to a macro cycle, it's basically 3 to 4 mesocycles strung together. So you got one mesocycle here, another mesocycle here, and another mesocycle there, each lasting around 4 to 8 weeks, which could last a total of a couple months, which will be the training block. And the last thing here is SFR. This is a really important term when it comes to exercising and choosing the proper exercises for you specifically. That basically refers to the stimulus to fatigue ratio. So how stimulating is the exercise for how much fatigue do you get out of it? So it's almost like a ratio between like how much stimulus and how much fatigue you get. And really quickly here, guys, if the stimulus is really high and the fatigue is super low, that means that it's an amazing exercise, like really, really good, right? Whereas if the stimulus is kind of low, not super ideal, and the fatigue is like sky high, that probably means that it's not a good exercise for you. So SFR is something we'll be using a lot throughout today's presentation. So with that out of the way, let's officially jump straight into it. So grab a pen, grab a piece of paper, and get ready to write down some notes. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is choosing your exercise selection. Now, before we begin, like, I don't want you guys to get dogmatic when it comes to this. There's no such thing as the perfect exercise. You may see bodybuilders either online on YouTube, on Instagram, social media, or even at your current gym right now, who swear by this one specific exercise, like, oh, you need to do the bench press in order to get a big chest, or you have to do the squats in order to grow your legs. And it may have worked for that specific person, meaning that the SFR of that exercise may have been really, really good for that person. Like, this person gets a really good pump and not as much fatigue from the exercise. However, I do know a lot of people who don't enjoy the bench press. It kind of hurts their shoulders a bit. It's a bit awkward for them. And the exact same thing applies to the squats. Like, it just kind of like feels uncomfortable. They feel a lot more like their glutes and lower back and not as much in the quads. And that is more of a individual thing, which means that it's not necessarily going to work for everyone, right? So do not get dogmatic with certain exercises. And really quickly, one exercise may feel phenomenal for your joints right now. However, in 10 to 20 years from now, it may not feel as good anymore, right? So whatever an exercise you enjoy doing right now, it may feel really, really good, but in a couple months or a couple years down the line, it may not, right? Wear and tear happens, kind of get stale over time. A lot of things could happen. So do not get romantic with certain exercises, because you guys will find out really quickly that there's a bunch of different exercises that will still target the same muscle group. So you don't have to do the bench press to grow your chest. You don't have to do the squat to grow your quads. there are tens of 20s of different exercises that you could do for that same specific muscle group, which may feel better for you. So that's really important to keep in mind. Now, if muscle growth is the goal, and we touched on this in the last presentation, I'm assuming moving forward that everyone's goal who's watching this right now, their main goal is hypertrophy or muscle building. Here are a couple of things to keep in mind. Pick exercises that, number one, cause tension and or a burning sensation in the target muscle group. So let's say you want to grow your biceps and you're doing dumbbell bicep curls and you don't really feel it in your bicep, but you feel it all in your forearms. That probably means that it's not a great exercise for you. Whereas if you use cable curls, for example, and you feel an amazing burn, an amazing sensation in your bicep, in the target muscle group, that's probably a good sign that it's a good exercise for you. The second point here is, does it give you a good pump? Does it give you the best pumps? Meaning that after you're done with the cable curls, do your biceps feel like they're like full of fluid, full of blood, and you just look in the mirror and you're looking like super pumped up, you're looking jacked? Does it do that? Or do you like not feel anything? Do you not get a pump at all? Third thing here is, does it zap energy from your target muscle groups the best? So do you feel kind of like locally in a muscle group, do you feel like it's kind of like zapped a lot of energy out of it? Or do you feel like you don't really feel like it did anything to you? Fourth thing here is that it stresses your joints the least. So for example, on the squats, it may be great for the quads, but if your knees start to hurt, your knees start to ache, and your lower back starts to hurt as well from doing the exercise, it probably means that it's not a good exercise. Whereas if you do the hack squat instead, it may feel phenomenal on your knees, no lower back pain, and you feel all the energy just going towards your quads. That is probably a good sign. Now, the last thing here is do all of the above without needless exertion or systemic fatigue. And basically what systemic fatigue means is that how fatiguing is it systemically to your entire body? A squats, deadlifts, bench press, all those big, heavy compound lifts are obviously very taxing and very systemically fatiguing to your entire body, to your entire nervous system. And so sometimes it's a better option to not go for those heavy compound lifts, depending on your workout phase, depending on when you do the exercise, like if you're doing it first thing in your workout or if you're doing it last. But sometimes it may be a better idea to not do those heavy compound lifts, which are very systemically fatiguing, and instead do an exercise that is less systemically fatiguing, more of like an isolation type exercise. So you basically want to be looking for exercises that give you the most amount of stimulus, but the least amount of fatigue, which basically refers to the stimulus to fatigue ratio. Like I touched on, exercises that give you the most amount of stimulus is a really good thing, and for the least amount of fatigue is also a really good thing. So deadlifts, for example, that's a big, heavy compound lift. The stimulus is insane, like your back should get pumped, your entire posterior chain should get a pretty good stimulus out of that. However, it does come at a pretty big cost of the fatigue as well, which means that the SFR is not probably the best. Whereas if your main goal was just to grow your back, maybe doing more of like a row, a bent over row, a machine row, a dumbbell row, cable row, maybe for your lats as well, like a lat pull down or pull-ups, the stimulus may still be extremely high, but it does not come at the cost of a lot of fatigue either, right? Because it's not systemically as fatiguing, and it can really just like dial in on that specific muscle group without hitting your entire posterior chain while doing so as well, right? So just a couple things to keep in mind. This is more nitty gritty and scientific stuff. And for most people, I will not worry too much about this, but if you do want to like fully understand the concepts behind hypertrophy training and how to get the most out of your exercises, then definitely keep on listening and continue on taking notes. Now let's move over to the reps and sets. So now that you found a couple handful of good exercise per muscle group, so you found a really good couple of exercises for your chest, for your back, shoulders, biceps, triceps, quads, glutes, hamstrings, and calves. Now let's look at the reps and sets. And so the rep range is a pretty broad rep range when it comes to muscle building and hypertrophy training. So the rep range is anywhere from about 5 to 30 reps. And now I know what you're thinking, that is a huge range of a rep range. Does that mean that I can do an exercise for 5 reps and I can also do an exercise for 30 reps? And the answer is yes. And this kind of goes back to the SFR thing as well. Whatever gives you the best stimulus to fatigue ratio. Quick little example here for the squat. Let's say, for example, most people, I would recommend doing the squats in around the 5 to 10 rep range, because doing the squat for around 20 to 30 reps, the SFR is not going to be as good, because especially with like a heavy compound lift like the squats, you got a lot of weight on the back, and yes, your quads may get a good stimulus. However, because it's so systemically fatiguing, other muscle groups may start to like limit your quads from actually going to true failure. So for example, on the squats, your cardio may be a limiting factor, your lower back may be a limiting factor, you're just being out of breath may be a limiting factor before your quads actually get fully taxed, right? Whereas if you do the squats within the 5 to 10 rep range, you can go pretty hard. You can go relatively heavy as well without your cardiovascular system or without your lower back starting to like be the limiting factor on that exercise, right? And I can do the exact same thing with a different exercise. So let's take an isolation exercise like the tricep pushdown. Imagine doing the tricep pushdown for around 5 to 10 reps. I mean, some people, sure, they could feel like somewhat of a good pump from it and somewhat of a good disruption out of it. However, for most people, like doing 5 reps on like a tricep cable pushdown, you're not gonna like feel a whole lot out of it, right? Same thing with like a dumbbell bicep curl. Like for most isolation exercises, I would definitely recommend going in the higher rep range, anywhere from about 10 to 20, even 20 to 30, especially for like the side delts, really like to feel that burn. Whereas in most of the compound exercises, I would recommend sticking mainly within the 5 to 10 rep range. Now, the reason why it's over 5 is because anything less than 5 reps does not give you a robust stimulus to actually like promote muscle growth. And anything above 30 reps will most likely just turn into cardio, and you're not really like, you're most likely just doing junk volume. You're just kind of like going through the motions, and it's probably like way too easy for you. So anywhere from about 5 to 30 reps, and anywhere in between that, there's no right or wrong answer here. If certain exercises feel better doing 30 reps, do that, do more of that. Whereas if other exercises feel better doing around 5 reps, then do that. So you get to pick whatever feels best to you and your body. Now, when it comes to the sets and the first week of your mesocycle, so your first accumulation phase, do enough sets to get a good pump and a good disruption. So this usually means around 3 to 5 sets on average. Now, if you're a beginner, you could definitely get away with doing around 1 to 5 sets per session. So for example, you want to train chest, all you really have to do is just do the bench press or a dumbbell press or a machine press, whatever type of chest exercise you want to do that has the best SFR. You can get away with doing around 1 to 5 sets. So after doing a couple sets of that, like you should feel pretty good, kind of like pumping your chest already. Whereas if you're more of an intermediate, you can do around 2 to 10 sets. And if you're more advanced, anywhere from around 3 to 12 sets to get like a high quality, good pump from doing that exercise. Now, to continue this on, you know you're doing too much when you can't recover in time for your next session. And also if you have overlapping soreness. And then what this means is that, let's say you're doing chest on Monday and Thursday, you're doing chest on Monday and you're doing 10 sets on that specific day. And then come Thursday, you're still extremely sore. Your chest has not fully recovered yet. And you're basically going into that workout still feeling sore. That is a sign that you're doing too much volume, too many sets, and it means that you're going to have to dial it back down again. So if that happens to you, what you can do next week is simply just like reduce the sets by maybe a couple sets so that you do recover in time, right? Because you do not want to be still training a muscle group while it's still sore. It's fine to do it every now and then, but if you consistently are sore when you have to train your next muscle group, it's probably a good idea to reduce the volume a bit on average. Now, the best approach here, guys, is to start at the lowest number of sets that you can do. They get you a decent pump and good muscle disruption. So again, going back to the last slide, if you're a beginner, this means around 1 to 5 sets, intermediate 2 to 10 sets, and advanced 3 to 12 sets. And now when it comes to the exercises you're doing for beginners, as you can tell, you can probably just get away with doing 1 specific exercise. Intermediates, probably around 2 exercises. And if you're more advanced, probably around 2 to 3 exercises, right? To hit your required sets number. And so every single week, just add 1 to 2 sets per week as you get used to the work. And so let's say what may have gone you sore from doing 10 sets of chest in 1 week may not get you as sore on week 2 and week 3 of your program, right? And so that means that every other week or so, you can add 1 to 2 sets per workouts per muscle group. So week 1, you may be doing 10 sets of chest, whereas week 2 and week 3, you may be doing 11 sets on average per week or 12 sets on average per week. Just change your volume based on how you recover. If you're not recovering on time, probably just keep it the same or reduce it a bit. Whereas if you're not feeling sore at all and you're recovering just in time or you're recovering well ahead of time, that means that you can probably get away with doing a bit more volume. So this is all pretty much auto-regulated, and this isn't like based on like you have to do 3 sets per exercise or you have to do 4 sets per exercise. Like, no, you don't have to do that. It all depends on like how sore are you getting? Are you recovering in time? If you are recovering, add more sets. If you're not recovering, keep it the same or decrease it a bit. Now let's talk about progression. So every single week, try to either add reps or add weights, or you can add both. So here's a quick little example of what this could look like. So let's say week 1, you're doing 100 pounds for 10 reps at 3 RIR. And basically, RIR stands for reps in reserve. And now what that means is that, let's say on your 10 rep max, you do 7 reps. That basically means that you've done the exercise at around 3 RIR because you basically left 3 reps left in the tank. So going back to the example, 100 pounds for 10 reps at 3 RIR in week 1. And now in week 2, you could do one of 3 things. So you can either add more weight, so go to 110 pounds while keeping the reps the same at 10 reps at around 2 to 3 RIR in week 2. Or you could keep the weight the same, keep it at 100 pounds, and do 11 or 12 reps at around 2 to 3 RER. And the last thing you can do is you can add both weights, 205 pounds, and add an extra rep to 11 reps at around 2 to 3 RER in week 2. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. So again, you can either add more weights, add more reps, or do a combination of both. Now, a hard rule to keep in mind is that every single week needs to beat last week's performance by either a tiny bit. So don't do the same thing that you did last week on week 2 and week 3 and week 4, because like I touched on at the beginning of today's presentation, if you're not giving your body a reason to grow and adapt to a newer stimulus, it has no reason to grow, right? It's like if you're constantly doing 100 pounds, 100 pounds, 100 pounds for the same amount of reps every single week. I mean, yeah, it may have been challenging for you in the first week and you may have seen some growth from that, but weeks 2, 3, 4, and 5, you're not going to pretty much see any results of that because your body is already used to that stimulus. And in order for it to like actually go, it needs to experience a novel stimulus and it needs to like experience like some difficulty in order to like get challenged and to grow by that. So that's really important to keep in mind. It doesn't matter how you progress, as long as you are progressing one way or another, that's all that really matters. So when it comes to adding sets from last week, add around 2 to 3 sets per session if you got a little pump or disruption last time. Add 1 to 2 sets per session if you got a good pump and disruption last time. And add no sets at all if you didn't heal soreness in time for the same muscle later that week. So like I touched on, if you're recovering just in time, you can definitely get away with adding 1 to 2 sets for that specific muscle group. Whereas if you're not recovering in time and you're still experiencing that overlapping soreness, then I would say keep the sets the same or even reduce it a bit if it continues to be overlapping soreness week after week. Now, this is where the deload comes into play. So after following these principles of progressively getting stronger and stronger and stronger, after around 4 to 8 weeks of like hard training on this accumulation phase, which again accumulates over time, gets harder and harder over time, your body, and not just your body, but your mind as well, will be absolute toast. And your volumes are most likely going to be very high. And every single set will be pretty much close to failure, right? It's because we started at week 1 at around 3 RER. And then as we progress week after week, we either add more reps or add more weights or do a combination of both. And your RER will start to drop to 2 RER, 1 RER, and then up to 0 RER, which basically means that you're going to failure, right? And what you may notice is that if you continue on going down this trend of just like continuing on pushing, you may be experiencing any lifter's worst nightmare, which is instead of progressively overloading, meaning that you're progressively improving and getting stronger, you may be regressively underloading, meaning that you're constantly just like getting weaker and weaker and weaker, because there will come a point in time when your fatigue is simply way too high and it'll start to mask your performance. So week 1, you're super fresh, you're ready to go, you just continue on improving, right? But then after 4 to 8 weeks, you'll just suddenly hit this wall because your fatigue will start to accumulate as you start to increase your performance as well. And then over time, your fatigue will simply just be way too high and it'll start to mask your performance and you'll just hit a wall, right? And once you hit that wall, which is again usually around the 4 to 8 week mark, that is a great time to deload. And now I really quickly want to like say this example. Let's say you do not take a deload week and you decide to say, you know what, I want to be hardcore. I don't need deload weeks. I don't need rest times. I just go hard in. I'll rest when I'm dead, whatever. Okay, cool. Let's say you continue on doing this. You hit this wall, but you want to continue on training. Well, what you may experience, instead of progressively overloading and getting stronger, you're now progressively underloading and getting weaker and weaker and weaker. So that's a bad thing. Obviously, you're in a gym to do high quality, productive work. And if you're getting weaker in a gym, it's like you're defeating the purpose of going into the gym and improving yourself, right? So that's the first thing. And if you continue on going down this road, you're at a huge risk of injury now as well, because if you're in a super fatigued state, your muscles aren't going to be like fully primed and you're not going to be like super secure and super safe. So you may notice some niggling injuries, some joint and connective tissue pain, and this could result in some niggling injuries or maybe even some long-term injuries as well if you're not careful. So yeah, a lot of downsides to not taking deloads and not taking care of your body like that. So deloads are really important. And so at this point, after around 4 to 8 weeks of hard training, for one entire week, it's basically going to be a deload week. And now the way we do this at Barbarian Physique, and there's a bunch of different ways to like go about deload weeks, but in essence, a deload week is basically just like an entire week of just easy, light recovery training. So here's a little example that you could try for your own training. So in the first half of the week, do half of the planned sets, half of the planned reps with 100% of last week's weights. So let's say you ended your accumulation phase at 4 sets of 10 reps at 100 pounds on a squat. Well, basically, you're just going to cut the sets and reps in half to 2 sets of 5 reps while keeping the weight the exact same at around 100 pounds. And now for the second half of the week, you're going to keep half of the planned sets, half of the planned reps, and now you're going to do half of the planned weight as well. So using previous example, instead of doing 4 sets of 10 reps at 100 pounds, you're doing 2 sets of 5 reps at 50 pounds. And as you guys can tell, this is super easy and light training. And yes, that's the entire point of a deload week, because it's supposed to reduce and wash away all the fatigue that you've accumulated over the past 4 to 8 weeks of hard training. And now once you're done with this, you're basically just going to repeat the cycle and go back to week 1 of your mesocycle and repeat the entire process. You may introduce a couple of new exercises, some new exercises that have a better SFR, because over time, certain exercises do kind of get stale over time. Let's say, for example, in the first couple of mesocycles, this one specific exercise feels really, really good. Let's say it's the bench press, but then on like your third mesocycle, you kind of like feel it's kind of like a bit stale. It's kind of like hurting your shoulders a bit more. It's hurting your elbows, and it just does not feel as good as it did on your first mesocycle. Well, then, like I said, we don't have to be dogmatic here. We could just simply switch up the exercise and just like switch it out for a machine chest press or a different chest press. So that's all that I have for you guys in today's presentation. So hopefully you guys took some value out of this. If you guys do have any questions for me, please let me know. I know this was a bit of a longer presentation, but hopefully this all made sense to you guys, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.